The bridge of the Zaro flagship was a marvel of technological prowess. Sleek lines, flickering holographic interfaces, and softly humming control panels glowed beneath a ceiling of obsidian glass that looked out onto the void of space. Captain Yor stood at the center of it all, tall and imposing, arms folded across his uniform as he studied the live feed ahead. The planet called Earth loomed in the distance, a blue and green sphere wrapped in clouds and defiance. To him, it wasn't a world worth fearing. The humans were backward, crude, and inefficient by the standards of the Galactic Alliance. Their technology was laughably outdated, their planetary defenses almost non-existent compared to the war-hardened armadas of Zaro. But despite all that, Yor couldn't shake the faint itch of caution at the back of his mind. It wasn't logic, it was instinct. Who brings a stick to a space battle? One of the younger officers joked, and the bridge erupted in low chuckles. The comment wasn't unfounded. Displayed across their primary screens were hundreds of elongated metallic rods orbiting Earth. No visible engines, no armaments, no energy cores. Just floating pieces of metal, cold and silent in the void. Yor narrowed his eyes, magnify. The rods zoomed in on the main display, still nothing special. Their surfaces were matte and scarred, perhaps from atmospheric exposure or primitive welding techniques. They didn't hum with power. They didn't glow. They didn't move. Pathetic sneered the weapons officer. They call that a fleet? I've seen more threatening scrap piles in the outer mining belts. Yor didn't respond immediately. He glanced at the secondary screen, where a few of their scout drones were finishing their scans. The data scrolled quickly, no life signs, no thermal output, no radio emissions, no shield matrices. Just inert metal, like space debris. Still, something gnawed at him. Not fear exactly, just unease. He cleared his throat. Report. No threats detected, replied Lieutenant Vec, head of systems monitoring. They're hollow, mostly aluminum alloys with some ferrous reinforcement. Structurally weak, no power sources, just dead weight. Yor let himself smile. Perhaps he had been overthinking things. Then let's get this over with. Begin the advance. Titan formation. Bring us into orbital range. Yes, Captain. The Zaro fleet, 24 massive cruisers, hundreds of fighters, and 6 planetary siege vessels began to shift. Like a tide moving in, they surged forward toward Earth's orbit, cutting through space with effortless precision. Yor could feel the energy thrumming under his boots as the ship's engines engaged more power. Let's make this quick, he muttered, mostly to himself. This will be the shortest siege in galactic history. More laughter echoed from around the bridge. Confidence radiated from his officers, and for good reason. No species had ever withstood a full-scale Zaro engagement. Their victories were always fast and brutal. The humans were no different. They'd shown resistance, some ships flaring weapons during earlier skirmishes on the system's edge, but nothing remotely threatening. Earth's diplomatic transmissions had gone from warnings to desperate pleas. Then silence. Now, they were just trying to bluff, surely. But then the rods shimmered. Just as the fleet crossed the outer edge of Earth's defense grid, a faint blue glow began to ripple across the rod's surfaces. One after another, the rods flickered like distant stars coming to life. Yor's smile disappeared. Wait, said Lieutenant Vec, his voice tighter now. We're detecting energy spikes. Massive ones. That's impossible, said the engineering officer. Those things are dead. We scanned them. Well, they're not dead anymore, Vec snapped, tapping at his console. New signatures just popped up across the spectrum. M fields are climbing. Particle densities rising. And Captain, they're aimed at us. Yor stepped forward, his hand gripping the edge of the command console. The image on the screen had changed. The rods weren't drifting anymore. They were rotating slowly but purposefully, aligning themselves with surgical precision. There was intelligence behind the movement. Defensive shields up, Yor barked. All units, prepare evasive protocols. But it was too late. Without a sound, the rods discharged. There were no blinding flashes, no dramatic beams of light, just raw, unfocused bursts of kinetic and electromagnetic energy, invisible to the eye but devastating in effect. The impact tore through the fleet like a cosmic hammer. Systems overloaded, shields collapsed. Hulls groaned under the weight of forces they weren't calibrated to withstand. On the bridge, every console flared red. Sparks exploded from a side panel. A ship to their starboard side, a smaller destroyer, tilted violently before disappearing in a plume of debris. "What the hell was that?" cried the weapons officer. Yor gritted his teeth. Primitive. Brute force. But calculated. The rods had no finesse. They didn't operate like traditional weapons, but somehow that made them more effective. They didn't trigger conventional defenses. They didn't rely on energy signals the fleet could anticipate. They simply hit with terrifying power. Yor slammed his fist against the railing. Launch countermeasures. Scan for targeting algorithms. Find out how the hell they're doing this. The officer beside him hesitated. "Captain, there's something else." Yor turned, breath short. "What now?" "There's a second wave incoming, launched from the planet's surface. Faster, more compact. These ones, they're different." He didn't have time to ask how. Within seconds, the new projectiles, these sleek, sharpened rods, burst into their field of vision. Unlike the earlier wave, these didn't drift or pulse. They sliced. One flew past the flagship's viewport, almost invisible until the moment it punctured the hull of a nearby cruiser. The explosion was instantaneous, blinding. More followed, screaming through space like silent daggers, bypassing shields with terrifying ease. Their material was unknown, some kind of energy-absorbing alloy that rendered most of their detection systems ineffective. Ship after ship crumbled, torn apart not by sheer force, but by strategic precision. Engines were severed, bridges destroyed, munitions ignited inside hangars. It was surgical annihilation. Yor's command ship shook violently. "Brace," he shouted. The deck tilted. A few crew members stumbled to the floor. Warning sirens blared overhead. Smoke drifted from a panel near communications. The bridge had turned into chaos. "They're inside our formation," Vec shouted. "They planned this. They baited us into position." Yor's mind raced. This wasn't some desperate last-ditch effort. It was a trap. Every one of those rods had been placed deliberately. Their timing, their activation, their trajectory, all part of a larger strategy. How had the humans, these underdeveloped primitives, engineered something so precise? And then came the worst moment of all. A voice crackled through the comms. It was a human voice. Calm, steady, almost casual. "We warned you." Everyone on the bridge fell silent. "We gave you chance after chance to leave us alone. You didn't listen." The voice wasn't threatening, but it cut through the panic like ice. "We don't need fleets," it continued. "We don't need plasma cannons or flashy tech. All we need is enough of these. Enough to make you remember this day." A few of the officers looked around, stunned. Even Vec seemed shaken. "This is your last chance," the voice said. "Turn back or face Earth's wrath." Silence followed. The words weren't shouted. There was no bravado, no anger, no arrogance. Just a cold certainty. A warning so confident it couldn't be ignored. Yor felt the air thicken around him. This wasn't what he'd expected. Not at all. They were supposed to invade a helpless world. Instead, they'd walked into the lair of something far more dangerous than they ever imagined. A species that had been pushed to the edge and finally snapped. He turned slowly toward the viewscreen. The planet was still there, quiet and beautiful beneath its swirling clouds. But now he saw it differently. It wasn't weak. It wasn't backward. It was watching, waiting. defiant. Behind him, no one spoke. The rods were still out there, drifting in silence. 1,000 threats in the void. Captain Yure's breath hitched. He'd underestimated humanity. They all had. And now, they were going to pay the price. The first wave of destruction had caught the Zaro fleet completely off guard. Crude metal rods, once dismissed as laughable relics, had delivered raw kinetic energy with staggering force. Dozens of vessels had already been damaged or destroyed, and the once pristine formation of the mighty galactic fleet now drifted out of alignment, crippled and confused. But that had only been the beginning. Captain Yure stood gripping the edge of his command console, knuckles white, as sensor alarms screamed around him. His crew scrambled, shouting overlapping reports from half-functioning systems. Warning lights flashed across every surface. There was no order anymore, only reaction. Chaos. Another wave. Someone screamed. Before Yure could issue a command, Earth's surface lit up with a terrifying display of light and motion. Launch trails streaked across the sky like shooting stars. The second wave of rods had been deployed not from orbit this time, but directly from the planet below. And these were different. They were sleeker, more compact, and they moved like predatory birds cutting through the vacuum of space. The first batch had been crude and slow, but devastating due to their brute force. This new barrage was a different beast, entirely faster, sharper, cloaked from sensors, their surfaces coated in material designed to absorb energy and evade detection. They didn't announce themselves, they simply arrived. The nearest Zaro cruiser exploded in eerie silence, only visible from the screen as it was pierced midsection, its core igniting in a wave of white-hot fire. A second ship spiraled out of control, its engines sheared clean off by a rod that no one had even seen coming. "They're accelerating them somehow," Ewer said aloud, watching the monitors with narrowed eyes. "This isn't random. They've calculated trajectories. Every launch is precise." A junior officer, face pale and voice shaking, spoke up. "Captain, the materials on the rods, they're not ordinary alloys. They absorb radar. There's no heat signature. No propulsion system we can track. So how the hell are they flying that fast?" Yer asked. "They're being slingshot," the officer answered, eyes darting across data feeds. "Using the planet's own magnetic field. It's primitive, but it's genius. No engines, just raw gravitational acceleration." Yor said nothing for a moment. His mind raced. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a final gasp of a dying world. This was a surgical strike, crafted, calibrated, and perfectly timed. Earth wasn't merely defending itself. It had turned its very environment into a weapon. "They've done their homework," Yer muttered. "They studied us. They knew how we'd approach. They were ready." The bridge shuddered violently as another impact rocked their shields. A nearby Zaro gunship spun out of control, struck by a rod that had appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. It was like fighting ghosts, only the ghosts had claws. "Ship 72 has gone dark. Ship 58 is breaking apart life pods, deploying Bridge 4 destroyed." The reports came one after another, flooding Yor's ears like a tide of failure. He glanced at the tactical map. Their once glorious fleet, spread out in perfect geometric formation, was now a mess of blinking red indicators, each one marking a loss, a breach, a crippled vessel. And through it all, the rods kept coming. They didn't need targeting systems. They didn't need fancy guidance AI. They were brute force answers to a complex problem. Objects hurled at such speed and force that even advanced shielding couldn't fully repel the kinetic energy. It wasn't high-tech, it wasn't beautiful, but it worked. "They're not fighting us like we fight," said Lieutenant Vec, stunned. "They're not using tactics like ours. They're doing something primal." Yer turned toward him slowly. "They're not playing war. They're hunting. Outside the viewports, space had turned into a scrapyard. Glowing embers of shattered hulls drifted through the darkness. The debris field was growing thicker by the minute, littered with pieces of vessels that had once represented centuries of Zaro engineering supremacy. But the humans had found a way around all of it, not by building something better, but by thinking in ways no one else dared. A technician near the rear console gasped. "Sir, we're detecting localized gravitational anomalies." You frowned. "Explain." "They're distorting gravity, small fields, enough to alter projectile paths or disrupt our stabilization. You're telling me they're using gravity as a weapon? They're manipulating it? Just enough. It's not consistent, it's more like someone littered the battlefield with invisible nets." The thought chilled him to the bone. He'd heard rumors, whispers of human experimentation with gravity manipulation, fringe science considered too unstable by Alliance standards. But now he was seeing it in action, and it was working. "Captain," another officer shouted, "we're being hailed. It's them again." "The humans. Put it through," Yer said immediately. The voice came once more calm, steady, almost casual. "We warned you," the human said, "but you wouldn't listen. You thought we were primitive, weak, outdated, but we don't need to outmatch your technology. We just need to outthink it." Silence followed, then the voice returned, colder this time. "We don't need fleets or flash. We just need enough of these to remind you that some lines shouldn't be crossed." Yer's throat was dry. He couldn't reply. There was nothing to say. The message wasn't a demand, it was a verdict. And Earth was the judge, jury, and executioner. "We can't fight this," muttered the communications officer, barely audible over the rising hum of warning sirens. "Not like this. They're using Earth itself," said Vec. "The planet is part of the strategy. It's not just home turf advantage. They turned the turf into a weapon." The second wave of rods wasn't slowing. More came up from below, and now the patterns weren't random. They came in spirals, clusters, almost artistic in how they moved. Each burst of energy, each impact, each flash of destruction, it had all been orchestrated with care. It wasn't rage, it was a lesson. "Captain," the engineering officer said slowly, "some of these rods, they weren't launched. They were just waiting, dormant in orbit, pre-positioned. They let us come to them." Yer's breath caught. "They waited until we were too deep to run." He stepped back, horror blooming in his chest like frost. All this time he thought they'd caught humanity off guard. But in reality, they had walked straight into a trap that had been years, maybe decades in the making. "Full retreat," he whispered, barely audible. "What?" Vec asked, eyes wide. "Sound the alarm," Yer said louder now. "We're not winning this. Not today. We retreat now." But it was already too late. The rods kept coming. Faster, stronger. Precision guided by gravity wells and magnetism, slingshot around the Earth's curvature with impossible speed. The Zaro fleet's formation broke entirely, scattered and desperate, like insects caught in a hurricane. One by one, the proudest ships of the Galactic Alliance were turned into floating wrecks, cracked, burning, venting air into the stars. Some tried to flee, only to be caught by gravitational surges and reeled back into the kill zone. Humanity didn't use shields. They didn't need them. They used the environment. They used psychology. And they used psychology. And they used patience. They had waited for the moment arrogance outweighed caution, when technology would blind an invader to the simplest of truths, that the Earth doesn't forgive. The message from the humans echoed once more. "Turn back. This is your last chance. Or we will escalate." And now, finally, Captain Yer believed them. Captain Yer could hardly believe what he was seeing. It defied everything he had been taught, everything the Galactic Alliance had assumed about Earth and its people. The once thought primitive world wasn't just defending itself anymore. It had flipped the board and changed the rules entirely. Now, it was attacking with a fury and intelligence that left his fleet floundering in the void. He had expected lasers and missiles. He'd prepared for shields and orbital dogfights. What he hadn't expected was for Earth itself to become the weapon. "Captain," the engineering officer said, his voice tight with disbelief. "There's a gravitational field forming along our outer perimeter." Yor turned sharply. "What kind of field?" "Localized, controlled, artificially generated. It's being manipulated, and it's distorting the path of our ships." He stared at the screen. The fleet's positioning was being pulled out of shape. The outer wings dragged slightly inward as if invisible threads were tugging at them. It wasn't strong enough to tear ships apart yet, but it was enough to disorient their trajectory, to make targeting and coordination a nightmare. "How is that even possible?" Yor muttered. "They don't have the infrastructure for gravity tech." "They're not using tech the way we do," the lieutenant replied. "They're using the planet's magnetic field, amplifying it. It's crude, but it's effective." On screen, another cluster of rods launched from Earth's surface. These weren't random missiles. They were tactically positioned kinetic weapons, each guided by complex gravitational bends that allowed them to curve mid-flight and strike from unexpected angles. One rod tore through the underbelly of a cruiser, slicing the vessel in half before disappearing into the black. Another punctured a battleship's engine core, igniting it like a powder keg. Ships that were once cornerstones of the fleet were reduced to flaming wreckage in seconds. "This is madness," Yor whispered, his voice nearly drowned by the growing cacophony of alarms. "It's like the planet itself is fighting," and in a way, it was. Earth, the homeworld they had dismissed as backward and outdated, was now lashing out with a vengeance that didn't rely on superior technology, but on ingenuity and raw environmental power. Mountains of metal, once silent, now rained from orbit or surged up from launch silos hidden across continents. The magnetic field, once a passive planetary feature, had been transformed into a slingshot for death. Even the gravitational anomalies were precise, nudging ships out of formation, weakening hulls, destabilizing energy cores. Every element of Earth's defense had been built not to show off, but to punish. The tactical officer broke Yor's thoughts. "Sir, incoming transmission," the voice returned, the same voice that had cut through the chaos earlier. Calm, cold, deadly. "You should have listened." There was a pause, and then it continued. "We warned you, over and over again." You laughed. Mocked. Threatened. But we were watching. Waiting. The crew fell silent again. Even in the heart of the storm, every officer on the bridge was transfixed. There was something paralyzing about the voice, not its volume, not even its words. It was the certainty, the terrifying stillness behind every syllable, the knowledge that Earth had meant what it said all along. "You thought we were weak because we didn't respond right away. You called us primitive because we didn't strike first. You assumed silence meant submission. But it wasn't weakness, it was restraint." Yor's jaw tightened. The humans weren't boasting. They weren't bragging. They were explaining. Like a teacher to a child. "You've awakened something ancient in us," the voice continued. "Something your kind doesn't understand. We fight not for conquest, but for survival. And when you threaten everything we are, our homes, our families, our planet, we don't come at you with pride. We come at you with finality, Captain." One of the officers stammered. "More readings. There's a surge from the planet's northern hemisphere, massive electromagnetic pulses. It's starting again." Outside the viewport, Earth shimmered. From the polar caps to the equator, faint blue currents danced along the atmosphere, cascading like curtains of energy. It looked beautiful, almost serene, until the first pulse erupted. A beam of charged particles ripped through the upper layers of the atmosphere and lanced directly into the heart of a Zaro destroyer. The explosion was instantaneous. There was no time for shields or countermeasures. The beam didn't act like a conventional energy weapon. It bent, wrapped, pulsed in chaotic waves, tearing through metal and igniting fuel. The bridge shook violently. "Compensate," Ur shouted, clinging to his console as sparks erupted from a nearby panel. "It's no use," came the engineering officer. "We can't stabilize. Their attacks are using the planet's field to resonate with our systems. It's like the planet is singing a song to break us apart." Another ship shattered. A column of debris shot across the sky. Transmission from a nearby vessel dissolved into static, punctuated by screams and the crackle of failing life support. "They're not just attacking us with weapons," the tactical officer said breathlessly. "They're using the planet's natural elements. Earth is the weapon." It was a revelation that shook Yor to his core. They had assumed warfare was a matter of ship-to-ship tactics, of superior hardware and processing speed. The humans had rejected all of that. They had leaned into the raw forces that surrounded them: gravity, magnetism, inertia, and they had turned them into tools of devastation. Another voice came through, this time from one of the smaller fleet captains. "Command, this is Captain Rohr. We can't hold this position. Our thrusters are failing. Gravitational disruptions are increasing. We're being pulled apart up here. Retreat is not an option," Ur responded automatically. But even as he said it, he felt the weight of the lie. His command was unraveling. The fleet wasn't executing strategy anymore. It was reacting, flailing, dying. His hands trembled slightly as he activated the fleet-wide channel. He could hear his own voice crackling with static. "All units, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Focus on regrouping beyond the orbital field." He didn't say retreat. Not yet. But every captain would understand what he meant. Another explosion rocked the flagship, cutting power to one of the bridge's rear consoles. The lights flickered. Smoke curled through the air. Then Lieutenant Varric stumbled onto the bridge. His uniform was torn, blood matting one sleeve. He held a scorched data tablet, his face pale and terrified. "Captain," he gasped, "they've encoded a message in the transmissions." Yor turned. "What message?" Varric handed him the device, fingers shaking. "It's a fail-safe. If we don't leave, they'll activate what they call Operation Cataclysm." Yor's heart skipped. "What is it?" "They don't explain." "They don't have to. It's not a bluff, sir. I don't think we can survive another escalation." Yor stared down at the device. The words glowed red on the screen. "This is your final warning. Turn back, or witness the wrath of a world that has nothing left to lose." And for the first time in his long and decorated military career, Captain Yor understood that he had led his people into a fight they could not win, not because of human superiority in weaponry or numbers, but because of their capacity for calculated fury. He looked again at the blue and green sphere floating beneath them. This wasn't a planet anymore. It was a trap. It was a weapon. And it was about to finish what it had started. The bridge of the flagship had become a war zone. Once a pristine hub of coordination and command, it now looked like a collapsing ruin, smoke wafting from ruptured consoles, sparks jumping from blown panels, the floor scattered with debris and the wounded. The once proud crew of Captain Yor, known for its precision and discipline, now moved like soldiers caught in the eye of an unstoppable storm, desperate, panicked, and haunted. Captain Yor stood at the center, gripping the edge of his console as if it could keep the galaxy itself from coming undone. His vision flickered between red-lit data readouts and the devastation on the view screen, Earth looming in the distance, that deceptively peaceful marble surrounded by burning debris and shattered starships. What was once a simple mission had become an escalating nightmare. And now, the transmission had come again. "Captain Yor," the voice said, steady and almost emotionless. "This is your last warning." The bridge fell into a tense silence. Everyone froze. The voice was human, male, with a tone that didn't waver. It wasn't threatening or emotional. It was final. Turn back now, the voice continued, or we will initiate Operation Cataclysm. You're swallowed. For all his military experience, for all the countless encounters he'd survived, nothing in his career had prepared him for this moment. He had faced rebels, pirates, planetary insurgents, but never had he heard a voice quite like this, calm, composed, and absolutely sure of what was about to happen. What the hell is Operation Cataclysm? Yer muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. No one had an answer. Not even Varric, who had delivered the encoded threat minutes earlier, could clarify what was coming next. It's their last card, Varric finally whispered. They've been holding it back. But I think it's real. You didn't want to believe it. Every instinct screamed at him to reject the idea. A species like humanity using their planet as a weapon, launching crude rods and manipulating gravity fields that was already unthinkable. But now, they were threatening something worse. And they weren't screaming. They weren't bluffing. They were resolved. The human voice crackled to life again. It's something we hoped we'd never have to use. But your persistence leaves us no choice. The way he said it chilled the room. There was no bravado, no sense of revenge. Just a cold surgical decision, like flipping a switch on a machine built for annihilation. Ur looked around at his officers. Some were still at their stations, hands frozen above consoles. Others leaned against bulkheads or sat injured on the floor. Every one of them had heard the same voice. Every one of them had seen what Earth could do without even trying its hardest. And now, they were being told that the worst was yet to come. Ur clenched his jaw. The words he'd once carried with such pride, Zaro, honor, protocol, superiority, sounded empty in his mind now. He had marched his people into a trap. He had mistaken silence for weakness and warning for fear. And now they were dangling at the edge of extinction. Sir, the tactical officer said softly, what are your orders? You didn't answer right away. He turned toward the view screen, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath them. There were no more rods launching, no new attacks yet. It was as if the humans were giving them one last moment to decide. A moment of mercy or judgment. He activated the command line, broadcasting to the remnants of the fleet. This is Captain Ur, he said, voice strained but steady. All ships are to hold position and await my command. There was a pause, then a voice from one of the few surviving captains replied, Captain Ur, are we falling back? Ur stared at the monitor. He thought about saying yes. He thought about surrendering to reason. But then he saw it again, that blue shimmer beginning to pulse around Earth's atmosphere. The quiet glow that preceded devastation, a warning wrapped in beauty. A message came through, not from his officers, not from the humans, from Earth itself. A planetary signature, massive energy buildup, targeting data and coordinates, their coordinates. Captain, the engineering officer shouted, eyes wide with panic. The planet's core is shifting. They're aligning energy channels across the crust. You're snapped to the display. Earth's magnetic poles were spiky, something vast, coordinated, designed. Sir, whispered Varric, they're about to fire again. This is it. This is Operation Cataclysm. Ur felt the weight of that word sink into him like iron. Cataclysm. A word reserved for extinction events, for the death of civilizations, for the end of empires. And here it was, triggered not by a supernova or a black hole, but by a species his people had mocked for centuries. He looked to his crew. They were watching him, waiting for the command. Many were bleeding, bruised, broken. Others were just holding on physically, emotionally, spiritually. They were soldiers, warriors, but they were also people, and they deserved better than to be slaughtered out of pride. Ur took a deep breath. Open a fleet-wide channel, he ordered. The comms crackled. This is Captain Ur to all remaining Zaro vessels. Prepare for full withdrawal. Effective immediately. A stunned silence spread across the bridge. Then came a chorus of replies. "Copy that, Captain." Pulling back from Quadrant 4, coordinates received. Disengaging. One by one, the remnants of the fleet began to drift away from Earth. Weapons powered down. Engines lit up. Damaged hulls streamed against gravity and debris fields as the ships limped toward the edges of the system. Ur slumped slightly, the weight of the decision crashing down on him. Pride burned, but survival won. He thought they might escape. He dared to believe it was over, but then the voice returned, no longer calm. It was still human, but now there was fire beneath the words. "This is what happens," the voice said, "when you're given the chance to leave, and you choose to linger." Ur's eyes snapped to the screen. Earth flared. Energy arced like lightning across the planet's magnetic field, then surged upward in colossal waves. Massive beams shot through the void, locking onto every ship still within range. "No," he shouted. "Full retreat, maximum thrust." But it was too late. One by one, the Zaro ships exploded. Silent, brilliant flashes lit up the stars as vessels were caught in the net of Earth's final strike. The beams didn't just destroy, they disassembled. They tore through ships at the molecular level, unraveling steel, wiring, armor, and flesh. The flagship groaned as its hull cracked. "Engines failing," screamed the engineering officer. "Shields down. Systems critical," came another voice. Sparks burst from the ceiling. Fires raged across panels. The bridge fell into chaos. And Yor, who had once stood tall with the confidence of an empire, was now clinging to a console as his ship broke apart beneath him. He looked at Earth one last time, that beautiful, deadly world glowing with power and purpose. This wasn't a primitive planet. It was a sentient engine of wrath, a place where mercy had run out. And in that final moment, as his ship cracked open and the void began to claim them all, Captain Ur realized the truth. They hadn't been fighting humans. They had been fighting a people with nothing left to lose, a species that remembered every insult, every time the galaxy laughed at them, and they had snapped. The humans hadn't screamed, they hadn't pleaded. They had warned. And when the galaxy didn't listen, they answered with silence, steel, and fire. No one would forget this day. Not ever. Captain Ur's ship was dying. He didn't need the alarms or the screaming damage reports to tell him that. He could feel it in the deck beneath his feet, in the flickering lights above, and in the wheezing sound of failing life support. The flagship of the once invincible Zaro fleet was now a crumbling coffin drifting through the darkness above Earth, a planet that had just rewritten the laws of war. The ship moaned again, a deep metallic groan from within its fractured hull. Ur gripped the edge of his console, eyes locked on the main screen. His vision was filled with the chaos of warships exploding in the distant silent eruptions of fire, debris, and shattered pride. His hands trembled. Everything he'd known, every doctrine he had studied, every assumption about warfare, power, and control was all being erased in real time. A junior officer staggered up beside him, half his uniform scorched. "Captain, we've lost 3 more vessels. 16 others are non-responsive. The fleet, it's gone. Gone." Ur's lips barely moved. "What about escape pods? Scattered. Some caught in the debris. Others pulled back by gravitational drag." The screen shook violently. Sparks flew from the ceiling. A panel blew out behind him, flinging a technician across the bridge. The ship was coming apart. Another beam from Earth surged through space and sliced a nearby Zaro cruiser in half like it was paper. Flames burst from the wreckage, fragments scattering in every direction, some slamming into Ur's own vessel with concussive force. A second lieutenant looked up from his damaged display. "Hull integrity is collapsing. We won't hold for much longer." Ur stared blankly. The fleet that had been sent to conquer Earth, the armada that was supposed to subdue humanity within hours, was now reduced to floating wreckage, burning in Earth's upper orbit. This wasn't just a defeat. This was annihilation. "We underestimated them," he whispered, his voice dry, barely audible. No one responded. They didn't need to. Everyone on the bridge knew. Everyone had seen it with their own eyes. The arrogance that had carried them here, the belief in their technological superiority, in the invincibility of their fleet, in the frailty of human resistance, had been shattered like glass. The humans hadn't overwhelmed them with bigger guns or faster ships. They hadn't relied on deception or stealth. They had simply snapped, and when they did, they didn't scream. They didn't roar. They executed, coldly, calculatedly, completely. Another warning rang out from engineering. Engines failing. Life support at 20%. Emergency power only. CO off lower decks, you were ordered. Prioritize crew survival. He didn't know why he still gave orders. Most of the ship's compartments were already compromised. Fires were spreading. Pressure was dropping. Every minute brought another section offline. Yet something inside him, the last threads of command, forced him to keep pretending he still had control. The tactical officer approached cautiously. "Sir, we need to consider abandoning ship. Your turn slowly." "To what?" The officer blinked, thrown by the question. "There's nowhere to go," Yer said quietly. "Pods won't outrun their weapons. We're within their reach. They let us go once. We didn't listen. This is the consequence." The officer lowered his gaze. Yer looked back at Earth on the main screen. From a distance, it looked calm again. Clouds rolled gently over blue oceans. Continents glowed under golden sunlight. A planet that looked so ordinary, so undeserving of fear. But now he knew better. Beneath that calm exterior lived a fury like nothing he had ever faced. They had studied humanity for centuries, dismissed them as erratic, emotional, tribal. But they had missed the most dangerous truth. Humans didn't just survive. They endured. They waited. And when pushed too far, they transformed. Lieutenant Varric stumbled into view, limping, soot smeared across his face. What? No more rods. No energy waves, just silence. Ewer stared at the readouts. No new launches, no more beams, no gravitational pulses, just silence. "What are they doing?" "I think." Varric hesitated. "I think they're watching." The implication struck Yer like a blow. The humans weren't interested in mopping up survivors. They didn't want to chase down every last ship. They didn't need to. They had already won. And now, they wanted the survivors to remember. "They're making an example," Yer said aloud. "They want the galaxy to see this." The communications officer, his voice hoarse, added, "Sir, an open transmission is being broadcast. Wide spectrum. Anyone in orbit can receive it. Put it through," Yer commanded. The voice returned, that same voice, calm, steady, and cold as ice. "This is Earth. To all remaining Zaro forces, we are finished speaking. Your presence here is no longer tolerated. If you remain within this system beyond the next planetary rotation, you will not receive another warning." The voice paused. Then it delivered the final blow. "We do not forget." The transmission ended. No threats, no chest pounding, just the facts. The kind of facts that echo through history. Yer took a shaky breath and looked at his crew. Most were wounded, some unconscious, others frozen in disbelief. This wasn't what they signed up for. They were soldiers of a conquering fleet. Elite, trained, equipped. But they hadn't been prepared to fight an idea, an emotion, a species driven to the edge. The humans had become something else, something more dangerous than any war machine. They had become vengeance. Another tremor rocked the ship. The emergency lights flickered. Red warnings scrolled across every remaining screen. The tactical officer returned. "Sir, other surviving vessels are initiating warp sequence." Some are falling back to the edge of the system. Ur nodded faintly. Let them go. And us? Ur didn't answer at first. He watched as the broken remains of his fleet drifted like bones across the black sky. And in the distance, Earth watched silently like a beast that had finished the kill, but would not forget the blood it had spilled. Then, finally, Ur spoke. Prepare emergency warp. Direct all power to core systems. But sir, we don't have enough energy. Do it, he snapped, fire returning to his voice. The officer nodded and ran to comply. Ur leaned against the console, breathing hard. He had failed. But he wasn't going to let every single soul aboard die here. As the systems began to hum and charge, he looked one last time at the world that had brought the Zaro Empire to its knees. They had tried to conquer Earth. Instead, they had found the one thing more dangerous than advanced technology or brute force. They had found resolve. They had found the unbreakable human spirit, and it had destroyed them. As the warp engine screamed to life, and the ship lurched forward into the stars, Captain Ur's final thought wasn't of vengeance, but of regret. And deep, reluctant respect. The stars were silent again. The fires that had scorched the upper atmosphere of Earth were slowly dimming. The shattered skeletons of Zaro warships, once proud, once perfect, drifted as smoldering debris across the void. There were no more weapons firing, no more desperate orders shouted into the void, no more ultimatums. Only the memory remained. Captain Ur sat in silence, slumped in what was left of the command chair on his failing ship. The escape from Earth's gravity had left his vessel scarred and barely functioning, and it would take days, if not weeks, to reach the outer fringe of the system. But they had survived, barely. The bridge was quiet now. No buzzing consoles, no barking officers. Just hushed whispers, the occasional hiss of steam from ruptured vents, and the slow, rhythmic thrum of backup life support. Behind him, stars rolled across the viewport like waves on a black sea, and they're distant now, but still visible was the planet that had shattered his fleet and his understanding of warfare. Earth, not just a world anymore, not in his mind. It had become something else entirely, something mythic, something terrifying. Ur's hands were blistered, one shoulder dislocated from the last impact blast. He'd refused medical aid. He didn't want the pain dulled. He needed to feel it to burn the lesson into himself as deeply as the scars Earth had carved into his fleet. He had led the charge. He had written the reports calling humanity militarily insignificant. He had stood before the High Council of the Zaro and laughed at Earth's outdated tactics, at their refusal to bow, at their so-called warnings. Warnings he had ignored. What a mistake. No. What a catastrophe, Captain. A quiet voice came from behind him. It was Varric, his once proud officer, now limping, hollow-eyed, and blood-stained. We've confirmed contact with 4 other ships, all in various stages of retreat. The rest are gone, Ur nodded slowly. And Earth, no signs of pursuit. Their broadcast stopped. We think, want us to leave and remember. Good, Ur muttered. We will. He stood, every movement aching, and walked slowly toward the viewport. The stars outside were vast and empty, but none of them held his attention. His eyes were locked on that blue marble, still glowing, still alive. They didn't want conquest, he said softly. They didn't even want revenge. They just wanted peace, and we wouldn't give it to them. Varric said nothing. They didn't fight like us, Ur continued, because they're not like us, not anymore. They've become something we don't understand, and never respected. He turned to face his officer. That's why we lost. Varric lowered his head. What do we tell the council? Ur's lips thinned. The truth. Silence hung between them for a long moment, before Varric nodded and limped away to prepare the official report. But Ur knew deep in his bones that no report would ever capture what had happened. There was no tactical summary or damage assessment that could explain the raw weight of that encounter. Earth had sent a message to every race watching: do not mistake silence for surrender. Humanity had held back not because they were weak, but because they had hoped for peace. They had shown mercy, again and again. And when that mercy was laughed off and discarded, they had acted, not out of pride, not even out of rage, but out of necessity, and they had acted with terrifying efficiency. The humans had turned their world into a fortress of natural force. They'll have used the gravity that held their oceans, the magnetism that shielded their skies, and the inertia of their spinning planet, and turned them into hammers of judgment. Their weapons hadn't needed elegance, just purpose. And purpose was something they had in abundance. Across the galaxy, other species would hear of this day. Perhaps some would scoff, just as the Zaro had, but most would listen and remember. Because now, there was no doubting it. Earth had shown what happened when the line was crossed, and what made it worse, the scariest part of all, was that they hadn't wanted to win. They had wanted to be left alone, but when provoked, they didn't just defend, they ended. In the months that followed, whispers of Earth's retaliation echoed through every corridor of power across the galaxy. Political broadcasts in high languages danced carefully around the subject, referring to it as the incident or the orbital correction. But those weren't the names that stuck. Among pilots and engineers, among spies and soldiers, it came to be called the snap because that was what it had been. A single moment, the breaking point, the day when the quiet ones snapped back. For every Zaro captain who had mocked Earth's outdated tactics, there were now only ghosts and drifting hulls in orbit. For every government that had once seen Earth as unworthy of consideration, there was now a void where ambition used to be. More importantly, for every planet that ever thought of invading Earth, a new memory now stood in the way, one of silence, blue skies, and death from nowhere. It was not the technology that had won. It was not even the tactics. It was resolve, a uniquely human trait burned into them by centuries of survival, betrayal, and rebuilding. A trait that had been underestimated again and again, but no longer. Now the galaxy knew. A lesson from the ashes years later, long after Captain Ure had retired, long after the final war report had been submitted and buried in archives, he found himself standing before a young academy class on a neutral colony station. His uniform was outdated, his medals faded, but when he spoke, the room fell silent. He didn't talk about strategy or sensor sweeps. He didn't reference ship diagrams or fleet formations. He told them a story about a planet at the edge of the galaxy, about a fleet that thought itself unbeatable, and about what happened when you pushed a people too far. They warned us, he told the cadets. They gave us every chance, but we thought warning meant weakness. That was our mistake. One of the students raised a hand. Why didn't they destroy us completely, sir? Why not finish what they started? Ure looked him straight in the eye. Because they didn't want revenge, he said. They wanted memory. They wanted us to remember. Not just the pain, but the mercy before the pain. The fact that we could have walked away. He paused, then added, they didn't need to kill every one of us. They just needed to kill our certainty. The room fell quiet again. And that was the final lesson. Because war isn't always won by firepower. Sometimes it's won by fear, by memory, by the moment when your enemy realizes that you're not fighting for conquest. You're fighting because they left you no other choice. That day, long ago, in the shadow of Earth, the Zaro learned a truth too late. There are some doors in the galaxy better left unopened, and Earth's silent, blue and watching had just slammed one shut, forever.